in modern warfare, and that the spirited and the phlegmatic stand as one in their presence. And furthermore, that those given to, quote, theatrics, which he equated to heroism, were dangerous. Well, John Keegan is no flake, but this last chapter was so inconsistent with his great build-up before it, and so inconsistent with the late 20th century warfare that I'd been involved in, that I had to believe that some fear of Armageddon was polluting his analytical judgment. He seemed to be using any excuse to put down that old bugaboo of the dangerous influence of individual personality on history. Moreover, he seemed to be trying to convince the reader that there is safety in leadership by committee and that natural forces are now dictating the shaping of our lives around a harmonious ant-heap of universal mediocrity. I, of course, don't agree. I agree with Harry Truman. Men make history and not the other way around. Well, I stuck it to Keegan on those grounds in the Wall Street Journal review I'd been commissioned to do. About a month later, I got a nice letter from John in England, and he almost seemed to agree with me. He sort of expected it from me, he said. My experience as a squadron wing commander in Vietnam showed me that in combat, high-performance, high-technology fighter airplanes are illuminating the difference between the courageous and the timid, not fuzzing it up. As the air war matured, as North Vietnam's air defenses became more sophisticated, human motivation became ever more important in the wild blue yonder. High-tech gear does not have the effect of lumping every combatant into the same amorphous mass of emotion-free anonymity. The truth as I saw it, now reinforced by many books written by experienced airborne commanders who regularly took strike groups into what we call Package 6, the Hanoi-Haiphong complex, was that failures of pilot nerve matched the record-breaking numbers of high-caliber flak guns, enemy fighters, and missiles they face. Higher-tech airplanes facing ever higher-tech opposition tend to increasingly polarize the warrior mass, with the heavy end of the fighting being taken over by proportionately fewer and fewer of the best. My good friend Jack Broughton, West Pointer my age, and leader as an Air Force colonel in his late 40s, of a record number of missions into Package 6, and author of books Thud Ridge and Going Downtown, says, quote, "Not everyone who had the basic credentials was up to the missions. We had a few guys who could fly okay, but they were not just built for the task at hand. In other words, being a keen pilot with a great little button puncher was not sufficient. And that task at hand included repeatedly watching comrades in their aircraft being instantly turned into golden blobs of flame by missiles and flak and MiGs. In the book Going Downtown, he tells of a Navy lieutenant commander, exchange pilot, who just refused to fly in Package 6 anymore. He made Jack so mad that he found himself hounding his legal officer, trying to keep the guy from returning home with his wings intact. Finally, the legal officer said, "Don't you see that the book is written to protect guys like this?" And I say, and maybe others, wow, what have we come to? Jack Broughton, organization man, hardly. His conscience was his guide. And when two of his majors who were built for the task downtown were about to be court-martialed unjustly, he sprang to their defense. As their operational commander, coming into the knowledge that the U.S. Air Force organization, so addicted to letter of law mentality as to seek the major's own gun camera film to convict them of a rule violation for firing in self-defense at an off-limits platform firing at them, that was specifically a Soviet cargo ship moored to a Haiphong dock offloading ammunition, Broughton called for and burned their film in the parking lot and took the career-ending court-martial himself. Well, of course, prisons as well as air battles are also worth a close look as incubator of authentic heroes. It was Anwar Sadat who, in his memoir, Reflections of Cell 54, wrote that there are only two places in the world where a man cannot escape from himself, and the battlefield and the prison cell are they. Prison, torture, and isolation prisons are ripe for the emergence of heroes, principally because their inmates are engulfed in moods of uncertainty and doubt. An odd thing to say, perhaps, but the most thoughtful authors I've read on the subject of why heroism is distorted or muted or dead in the 20th century stress the lack of the uncertainty factor in modern industrial states. Winston Churchill, in his book of essays entitled Thoughts and Adventures, deplores the evaporating of the basic survival quandaries that hovered over generations 100 or 200 years ago. Can modern communities do without great men? Can they dispense with hero worship? Can the common sense of the masses provide a larger vision, a nobler sentiment, and more vigorous actions than were ever got from the Titans? Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in A World Split Apart, makes the case for those inward-looking, self-contained cultures that survived in dangerous worlds, where mystery and doubt and valor and spiritualism enriched a life. Well, that's where we were in Hanoi, being closed in on dangerous, erratic, and unpredictable forces over which no means of gaining leverage was immediately obvious. All I'm saying is that in those conditions, hardly a person exists, no matter how romantic he is or not. Hardly a person exists who does not in his heart of hearts secretly beseech the gods to grant one or more around him the instinctive grasp of where leverage lies and the personality to demand and receive the acquiescence of the group to let him come forward and do his stuff. I don't want to labor the point of the prison story in North Vietnam in that long ago war. Although Navy pilots and NFOs poured into Wallow Prison for 8.5 years, the really telling years were only 4. November 65 to November 69. 4 years of darkness, I call it. And it was during that period that there was plenty of acquiescence to let the standouts of any rank come forward and do their stuff. When it came to passing out punishment, and this is important, the Vietnamese were anything but inefficient. They nailed the people who were hurting them. So a study of the solitary confinement and torture records of that American prison population that swelled from 50 to about 331 in those 4 years of darkness can be seen as a graphic distribution of the American leadership effectiveness over the period. A real, a canned experiment, if you trust their results, and I do. Not out of, integrity, but out of purpose. How did that distribution check with rank order? And they ignored our rank order, so that made it a pretty open question. Let me give you one example. They announced that they were going to exile those who, quote, most severely incited others to oppose the camp authority. That was their word for leadership, my word for leadership. And spent 2 months torturing, cross-checking stories, working up the list. Who made the cut? And the cut was to 2 years in exile and solitary and leg irons. This is from a population where 2 Air Force officers to every 1 Navy in all ranks existed. 11 altogether made the cut. And this was a scientific observation, I'm trying to make it. And of that 11, 5 were 05s, commanders, or lieutenant colonels, but all 5 were Navy. I'm trying to give you just a little glimpse of another reason to be proud of this naval service, because these facts are correct. All 5 of the leaders they chose to exile were Navy, the top 5. Then also behind them were 2 lieutenant commanders, an Air Force major, 2 Air Force captains, and a Navy Lieutenant J.G. And let me tell you, they picked the most valuable men in that underground organization in that summer of 67. I was there, and we call it the Alcatraz Gang. So the Navy showed up well and should be proud of that. Solitary confinement totals, I'm hurrying because I tried it this afternoon. I have too many statistics. I'm just cutting the bottom out. But the solitary confinement total should make Navy and Naval Academy people very happy and proud. The average per capita month solo, this is the bottom line, of those 4 years of darkness. And this is not a slander, but the facts. Air Force, 6.5 months per man. All Navy, 11.7. USNA, 15.5. To be locked up in 3 years solitary, you really had to be a resistance problem to the Vietnamese, and only 8 prisoners of the 331 were in solo that long. 6 of the 8 were Navy, and they're outnumbered 2 to 1, including the JG. 5 of the 331 were in solo all 4 years. 4 of those 5 were Navy. 2 of those 4 were U.S. Naval Academy graduates. And USNA represents